What does an old man know about a high society wedding? That's what Stephen muttered when he thought I couldn't hear him. But I heard, and I remembered. My name is Edmund Blake. I am 72 years old, a widower, and a retired Federal Railroad accident investigator. I spent 31 years with the U.S. Department of Transportation. I'm used to silence, the kind that comes not from an inability to speak, but from knowing that words poorly timed become liabilities. I have one son, Stephen Blake. The same boy who used to run around the kitchen with a little wooden train I carved for him myself. Now he wears suits tailor-made in Milan, talks like one of those investment brokers on CNBC, and lives in a penthouse with a balcony overlooking the Hudson River. I don't care about the glitz, but I do care about one thing: attitude. And Stephen's attitude began to change the day he met Danica. Danica Miles. My future daughter-in-law comes from money. Old money. The kind of inherited wealth that's always accompanied by a tight-lipped smile and an eye that can instantly distinguish who belongs in the room. I met her exactly 3 times before the wedding. Each occasion was a silent, unofficial test, and I knew I had failed. I discovered I wasn't on the guest list for my own son's wedding when I happened to see a printed-out email that the wind had blown off the dining table. Don't ask why I looked. A person who's investigated midnight train derailments doesn't need much of a reason to be suspicious. All it takes is a misplaced comma in a report, an odd number in a schedule, or an unclaimed envelope lying in the wrong place. I bent down and picked up the paper. The title was in bold, "Wedding Guest List. Final revision. For approval." I scanned the columns of names. There was Danica's father, Gregory Miles. There was her mother's publicist. There was even the name of their dog trainer from 2008. But not me. There was no Edmund Blake. I folded the paper, placed it back on the table, and said nothing. But my mind began to work like a subway map, branching, connecting, layering every small signal into one large hypothesis. What were Stephen and Danica thinking? That I was too old to know the difference between a red wine and a rosé. That I would sit in the wrong chair, mispronounce someone's name, and shatter the perfect picture they were trying to build for their big day. Their mistake was thinking I would just stay silent and disappear. That evening, my granddaughter Emily called. She asked what I was planning to wear to the wedding. I chuckled and told her a white shirt, polished shoes, a navy blue tie, and a good memory. She laughed, thinking I was joking. I wasn't joking, because at that moment, I had already started planning. If I was truly being cut out of the picture, then I would also take back the frame. And I would let that picture fall the moment they tried to hang it on the wall. I went to the bank the next morning, not to transfer money, but to check on it. It's a habit I picked up from my investigator days: never sign anything without keeping a meticulously stored copy. And if I don't have a copy, it means I never signed it. The teller, a young man named Raymond, who had handled my accounts when I sold my old house in Durham, greeted me with an expression that was both polite and slightly wary. The kind of look you get when an elderly person walks into a bank unannounced. "Mr. Blake. It's been a while. What can I do for you today?" I handed him a handwritten note. I'd like a statement of all transactions from May to the present. Specifically, any expenses related to the names Whitestone Venue Pearl Weddings, or any event planning services in the New York area charged to my name, or the secondary savings account ending in 7789. Raymond hesitated for a moment. "This is the joint account with Stephen Blake, correct, sir?" I nodded. "That's right, and I still have full oversight." 30 minutes later, I was holding a slim file, only 8 pages. But for me, it was more than enough to reconstruct the entire picture. I sat in a coffee shop across the street from the bank, ordered a black iced coffee, no sugar, and started to read. 7,500. Deposit for the wedding reception at the Whitestone Grand Ballroom. 2012 than $200. Premium sound and lighting services. 2008 custom 5-tier wedding cake from Gossamer Cake Co. 8400. Custom tailored couture wedding gown from Destra Bridal. 16,050. Airfare and honeymoon suite in Venice. Every single charge was from the account in my name. Not one was run by me beforehand. Not a single confirmation email. Not a word of thanks. I leaned back in my chair, resting my hands on the table. I wasn't angry. I wasn't shocked. It was just the familiar feeling of someone who has read too many falsified reports, only to realize the problem wasn't the accident, but the premeditation from the very beginning. That evening, Emily came over. She's a freshman in college studying mechanical engineering just like I did. She told me Danica had just posted a picture on Instagram, the wedding dress hanging next to a giant mirror with the caption, "For the days that truly belong in a class of their own." I said nothing. I just asked Emily one question. "Do you have any idea who paid for that dress?" She blinked. "Wasn't it Danica's family?" I handed her the printed invoice. She read it and fell silent. "Grandpa?" "This is wrong. This is so wrong." I nodded, but I didn't need someone to confirm it was wrong. I needed them to confirm their own mistake in front of everyone. I made a call to Fiona Tran, the representative from Pearl Weddings. I had spoken to her once over Zoom, back when the groom's father was asked to sign off on the payment for the honeymoon package. She picked up on the third ring. "Fiona, this is Edmund Blake. I have a question. If the person paying for all the wedding services were to request a complete cancellation, how does your system handle that?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Sir, according to the contract, if the payer requests a cancellation more than 72 hours in advance, there's a 10% forfeiture of the total cost, but all services will be halted immediately. A confirmation notice would then be sent to all vendors." I spoke each word clearly. "Send me the original contract. I want to read it again before I take any action." Fiona didn't ask why. Maybe she'd seen my name on too many invoices. Or maybe she was starting to understand just how unusual this wedding was. I hung up. Then I stood, went into my bedroom, opened the closet, and pulled out an old wooden box. Inside was something I'd kept for years, a fountain pen engraved with my late wife's name, Margaret. She was the one who taught me, the more you're pushed out, the more you need to act with principle. I knew I would be using this pen, not to sign a congratulatory card, but to rewrite the script for the wedding they thought they had written me out of. I arrived at the Whitestone Grand Ballroom at 3:00 p.m., an hour before the ceremony was set to begin. It wasn't raining, but the wind was cold, and the sky was the color of granite. I wore the only suit I'd kept since my wife's funeral, dark gray with a crisp white shirt, no tie. In my inner pocket was a white envelope containing a handwritten card. I didn't plan on giving it to anyone. I just brought it, to see if anyone would prove themselves worthy of receiving it. Stephen and Danica's wedding was staged like a high society play. Crystal chandeliers, pre-ceremony cocktails, and flowers cascading from the ceiling like white waterfalls. Everyone was dressed as if they were heading to a dinner party in a Manhattan clock tower. No one gave me a second glance. They didn't know who I was. And that said more than enough. I walked straight to the reception desk, where a young woman with a name tag that read, Clarissa, looked up at me with a practiced hotel smile. "How can I help you, sir? I'm Edmund Blake, the groom's father." She typed a few lines into her computer. Then she stopped. Her polite expression shifted to one of cautious reserve. I'm very sorry, sir, but your name is not on the official guest list. This is the list that was confirmed this morning." I remained silent. Silent long enough to hear the clinking of glasses from the champagne bar in the distance. "Perhaps you could get Stephen Blake. I think he should be the one to confirm this. Clarissa froze for a beat, then spoke into her walkie-talkie. 2 minutes later, Stephen emerged from a nearby hallway, walking quickly, as if he was afraid someone might see who this old man was. He pulled me into a quiet corner, his voice low. "Dad, why are you here?" I looked him straight in the eye. It was the same look I once used to compel a witness to tell the truth after a train wreck in Missouri. "You don't need an invitation when you're the one who paid for this entire ballroom. Correct?" Stephen glanced around nervously. "Dad, it's not what you think. Danica didn't want—" I said, nodding. "Danica didn't want it. And you didn't dare." He turned away, rubbing his hands together. "I just didn't want to make a scene. Today is very important to Danica. Her family has expectations, and I'm not part of those expectations," I stated, calmly. He didn't answer. Only silence cracking like thin ice underfoot. I took a good look at Stephen. The perfectly tailored suit, the slicked back hair, the rimless glasses. It was all part of the persona he'd learned from his high-end clients. The only thing he'd left behind was his heart. The decent part of a boy who once begged his father to set up his model train to run through the night. I exhaled slowly. "You removed my name from the guest list. So today, I'm removing my name from the list of sponsors. Fair's fair, right?" The color drained from Stephen's face. I placed the envelope in his hand. "Good luck with a wedding that has no foundation." I turned and walked away. No one stopped me. No one saw me out. No one called my name. There was only the faint sound of background music and the voice in my own head echoing, "A wedding that has no room for the father doesn't deserve to be paid for with his money." I got home at 4:45 p.m. It still hadn't rained. The sky had the color of old metal, a dull, silent gray. I didn't turn on the lights. I just sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, and logged into my bank account. I didn't need to double-check. I remembered every payment, every floral arrangement, every logistical service, every plane ticket to Venice. I called the bank's VIP customer support line. "Good afternoon, Mr. Blake. This is Sophie from Personal Banking. How may I help you today? I want to cancel all payments related to the wedding of Stephen Blake and Danica Miles. That includes any transactions with Pearl Weddings, the Whitestone venue, Gossamer Cake, Destra Bridal, and all associated vendors." Her voice faltered. "Sir, for verification, you are the primary name on these charges, correct? I am the one who paid, yes. But I was not the one who was invited." The silence on the other end of the line was a wordless acknowledgement. Then Sophie spoke softly. "I understand. Please hold for a moment, sir. I will process this immediately and send an electronic confirmation within 30 minutes. And the non-refundable charges, we anticipate a loss of around $6,000 to $8,000, mostly deposits for the venue and the orchestra. But the remainder, nearly $80,000, will be returned to your account within 24 hours. I can accept losing the money. I can't accept losing my self-respect." Her voice was softer when she replied, "I understand, Mr. Blake." I hung up. I sat in silence for another 10 minutes. Then, I called Fiona Tran. "Fiona, it's me, Mr. Blake. I don't know what to say. I just received the cancellation notice from your bank. Good. I need you to send out the cancellation alerts to all vendors immediately. No delays. I don't want this game to continue past 6 o'clock. Fiona was quiet. Then she said, her voice barely a whisper, "You know, I've seen many parents sponsor their children's weddings, but I've never seen one get cut out of the very day they helped build." A small, grim smile touched my lips. "Then, I suppose your first time will be a memorable one." 6:12 p.m. My phone buzzed. It was Emily. Her voice was mixed with a hubbub of confused murmurs in the background. "Grandpa, something's happening." "What is it, Emily?" "The hotel just announced they're ceasing all services. The decorators are taking down the flowers. The kitchen has been shut down." The music stopped. Danica stood up to say something, and she fainted right in the middle of the ballroom. Her mother is screaming that this is some dirty trick from the groom's side. Stephen is just standing there, frozen. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. "Are you okay?" I'm standing in a corner of the hall. No one's noticed me yet. "But Grandpa, did you do this?" I answered slowly. "No, I just stopped doing something, and the rest collapsed on its own." The line went quiet. Then Emily let out a shaky breath. Her voice broke slightly. "I'm so proud to be your granddaughter." I didn't need to hear anything else. I hung up. I opened my email. A new message. From Fiona. Subject: I have resigned. The body of the email was short. "Mr. Blake, I cannot continue to represent an event like this. I was a witness, and I have chosen not to be silent. I just wanted you to know you were the only person in that entire room with any dignity today." I closed my eyes. In my mind, I heard the sound of an old train, the sound I had chased my entire youth. Not to run away, but to follow the tracks until I found the truth. And this time I didn't need an accident to investigate, because my own son had crashed head-on into the self-respect of the man who raised him. And that was a collision no one could pretend they didn't see. I made tea at 6:40 p.m. Earl Grey, the kind my wife used to like, strong, unsweetened, with a sharp, dry finish. Outside the window, the sky was darkening to the color of lead. No one called. No one came by. Everything was quiet, just as I needed it to be, until Emily called a second time. "Grandpa, social media is exploding." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "There's a clip on TikTok. It's the scene of Danica collapsing in the ballroom. The flowers being taken down, the music cut off. Someone filmed the whole thing. The caption says, 'Groom's dad quietly pays for everything, gets kicked out of the wedding, then pulls all the funding at the last minute.' It has over 200,000 views in an hour." I set my teacup down. "Who filmed it?" "A girl named Brittany. She's the daughter of one of the guests, a beauty vlogger. She caught Danica's mother screaming, 'This is a trick from his trashy family,' right as the hotel kitchen shut down." A faint smile played on my lips. That sentence was the loudest confession of all. Emily sighed. "People are taking screenshots, analyzing every face: Danica's when she passed out, Stephen's when he was speechless, the head of the floral team yanking ribbons from the centerpieces. Everyone knows something went terribly wrong." I closed my eyes and was silent for a few seconds. "Someone will eventually ask, who paid for it all?" "They already have, Grandpa," Emily said softly. A waiter, his account is @waiteronduty, posted a video telling his side. He said he saw your name on the payment authorization with his own eyes. I opened my laptop. Not to go online, I don't use social media. But my email had a new message from an unfamiliar address. From @waiteronduty subject. "I just wanted to thank you. I was serving drinks today. I saw everything. The moment you were denied entry, the way you didn't scream or curse. You just quietly turned and left. But after that, everything fell like dominoes. I just want to say, you're not alone. I'm speaking up because you deserve to be called a father. They are the ones who don't deserve that kind of love." I closed the laptop. I didn't need to read anymore. The next morning, as I was trimming the maple tree in my backyard, my phone rang again. "Grandpa, Danica has locked all her social media accounts. Stephen is being tagged everywhere. Deadbeat son of the year. The media is starting to write articles. What are they writing? The headlines are things like, "When the sponsor gets cut from the wedding he paid for a soundtrack for betrayal." They even have a blurry security camera photo of you leaving the hotel holding the white envelope in your dark suit. People are zooming in on it. I didn't respond. Emily hesitated. "Grandpa, do you regret it?" I answered softly. "No, because I didn't destroy anything. I just stopped funding a script that I wasn't written into." A few seconds of silence passed. Then I added, "Sometimes the deepest revenge is absence, not to cause pain, but to make them understand who was really holding everything up in the first place." That evening I drank my tea alone. No television, no news. I just looked out at the garden where the yellow porch light illuminated the maple leaves. And in my heart, there was a feeling of lightness. Not because the wedding had collapsed, but because I was no longer forcing myself to stand in a story where people were trying to erase my name. 7 in the morning. I was making coffee when I heard a banging on the door. Not a polite knock, but a fist pounding hard and frantic like a lost man searching for a wall to hold on to. I glanced through the blinds. It was Stephen. His shirt was wrinkled, his tie was loose, and his eyes were bloodshot. I wasn't surprised. A man like him, after being exposed, has nowhere to go except to the place he once despised most. I opened the door. I didn't invite him in. I didn't ask any questions. He strode into the house as if he'd been stripped of his identity. He stood in the middle of the living room, hands, trembling lips pressed into a thin line. "Dad, why would you do that?" I poured the coffee, setting 2 mugs on the table. But I only sat down in one chair. "You have to ask. I don't know what you were so angry about. But you destroyed my entire life in one night." Danica fainted. Her mother called me an old mooch. My company called an emergency meeting. My contract approval authority has been suspended. Everyone looks at me like I'm trash. I took a sip of my coffee. The bitterness was perfectly timed. You built a wedding without me in it, so you can't blame me when the foundation crumbles after I've withdrawn from the project. Stephen collapsed into the opposite chair. His eyes were vacant. "But if you had just said something, if you had let me know." I cut him off, speaking slowly. "I once gave you a hand-knitted wool blanket when you went off to college. You told your roommate it was something a hick would own." I didn't react. I thought you would grow up. But from that day on, I knew you didn't want the image of a railroad engineer father standing anywhere near you. He fell silent. I stood open my file cabinet and pulled out a stack of papers, the wedding invoices all stamped with the bank's confirmation. I laid them out in front of him, one by one. Danica's wedding dress, $8,400. The 5-tier wedding cake, $2,800. The dinner for 120 guests, $21,000. The 14-day honeymoon in Venice, $16,050. The live jazz band, $4,200. The white orchid decorations for the entire hall, $500 to $600. I said nothing. I just let him look. Stephen's face went from red to white, then to gray. "Dad, you paid for all of it." "None of them did. Not Danica, not her parents, and not you." He buried his head in his hands. His shoulders trembled slightly. "Now, social media is calling me a terrible son. I can't even go outside. The entire Miles family sent a notice to cancel their sponsorship contracts with my firm." I looked at him directly. "And you came here hoping I would help you get your honor back." He looked up, his eyes wide with the desperation of a drowning man. "At least you could pay the money back so the wedding doesn't become a joke. Or issue a statement clarifying that you weren't kicked out." I shook my head. No, I don't use money to patch up a fake reputation, nor do I fix the mistakes of someone who tore up his own father's invitation. He stood up dazed. I don't want to lose you. I nodded. Then you shouldn't have let me walk out of that hotel, holding a card of congratulations that no one was there to receive. I opened the door. Go home, and the next time you want to keep someone in your life, don't start by deleting them from the list. Stephen walked out, head bowed. He didn't look back. He didn't say another word. I closed the door and leaned my back against the wood. I didn't cry, but for the first time in years, I felt like I was standing in the right place, not behind my son, but in front of my own self. 3 days after that confrontation, I received an email. The sender, Stephen Blake. The subject line was just one word, Dad. I opened it, taking my time. Dad, I know I was wrong. I destroyed everything. Danica went back to her parents' house. The company transferred me to the Greenville branch. My salary was cut in half. They won't let me manage any major contracts anymore. I know everyone is calling me a disloyal son, and I see myself that way too. If you don't want to see me again, I understand. But I just wanted you to know. I see it all clearly now. Everything. Stephen. I read it 3 times, not to check for spelling errors, but to determine where the true meaning lay. And I didn't reply. Not out of spite, but because some apologies, when they come too late, are no longer about remorse. They're a cry for help. And I did not want to be the last life raft for someone who only reached for it after everything else had sunk. That afternoon, Emily called again. Her voice was hesitant, as if she were walking through a rock slide. Grandpa, I saw Dad today, in the parking lot next to his old office. I didn't interrupt. He was just sitting in his car, alone. The engine was off. The window was partly down. He wasn't smoking, wasn't looking at his phone, just sitting there staring out at the lake. For a long, long time. Like someone who had lost his way. I could picture it. The man who dreamed of climbing to the highest echelons of society was now trapped in the very silence he once used to discard others. Emily spoke softly. I know I shouldn't feel sorry for him, but I still do. Because he's my father. I replied, my voice as soft as the breeze on the porch. Some people only learn what's right when they hit rock bottom. Some need a collision. Some need a wound. Emily was quiet for a long time. Then she asked, do you think? He's really sorry. I didn't rush to answer. Finally, I said, I don't know. But if he is, it's not because of me. It's because he lost everything he once believed was important. That night, I printed Stephen's email. I didn't tear it up. I didn't reply. But I didn't delete it either. I folded it carefully and placed it in a small wooden box alongside a few old photographs, me, Margaret, and Stephen, on the day we opened our first laundromat back in 1991. I kept it. Not for forgiveness, but as a reminder that silence can also be an answer. And sometimes, it is the most powerful way to protect the final boundary of one's self-respect. I left Raleigh on a gloomy morning at the end of March. No one saw me off. There were no goodbyes, no announcements, just me. My old 2004 sedan, 3 cardboard boxes, a suitcase of clothes, and an old family photo. Margaret and Stephen, back when he still hugged a teddy bear and didn't yet know how to look down on his own father. I drove south, to a small town named Bridgehaven, tucked away behind rows of old maple trees where people still greeted each other with a look in the eye. I rented a small wooden house, painted cream, with a silver tin roof and a front porch wide enough for a folding chair and a pot of geraniums. There was a persimmon tree in the yard, and out back a low wooden fence with no lock. As if everyone understood, if you're going to step into my life, do it with kindness. On my first day in Bridgehaven, I did nothing. I didn't turn on the TV, I didn't check the mail. I just walked around the neighborhood, hands in my pockets, observing the windows of each house. Some had American flags. Some had open garages, revealing woodworking tools. There was a little coffee shop called Dandelions, with a handwritten sign and old wooden chairs on the porch. No Wi-Fi. I went inside, ordered a hot black coffee. The owner, an old woman with white hair named Hazel, looked at me and asked, "New?" Here I nodded. She didn't ask any more questions. She just said, "If you want to stay long, don't talk much. But remember to smile at the stray cats. Around here, cats are a lonely man's best friend." I smiled. A real one. Then I took my first sip of hot coffee in a town where no one knew me as the father of the groom from the canceled wedding. And I felt lighter. Not because they didn't know, but because I no longer needed them to. I signed up for an evening painting class at the community center. The instructor was an old man named Rufus, a former technical illustrator for the New York City subway system. We didn't talk about family. We only talked about color light and how a curved brushstroke can bend a memory. After the third class, he told me, "You have the hands of a man who worked with details." I replied, "I used to read the story of an accident from the scratches on a steel rail." He nodded. He didn't ask for more. He just clapped me on the shoulder and handed me a tube of Viridian green paint. To repaint what you thought had faded. Emily still texted every week. Sometimes a picture of a homework assignment, other times just a photo of an ice cream cone with the caption, "You have to try this when I visit Bridgehaven." I saved them all. I didn't miss a single one. Not because I was lonely, but because I knew a relationship that doesn't need to be flaunted is the kind that doesn't easily fall apart. That night I sat on my porch sipping tea and watching the moonlight fall on the tin roof. I thought about myself no longer, Stephen's father, no longer the retired engineer, and no longer the sponsor who was erased from the wedding. I was just Edmund Blake, a 72-year-old man who was learning to paint again, who was slowing down, and who had stopped asking for permission to exist. Emily arrived in Bridgehaven on a Saturday morning. The bus stopped at the end of the street, and she stepped off, pulling a small suitcase and carrying a tin of cookies, the kind she always bakes when she has something important to say. I met her on the porch. We hugged tightly. No words were needed. For lunch, I made black bean soup and sliced a dark-crusted loaf of bread. We ate under the flowering purple wisteria in the backyard. Emily talked about school and her friends, and then she pulled a white envelope from her backpack. She held it with both hands and placed it on the table. "I found this in a drawer at your old house. It's handwritten. On the outside it says, 'For Stephen, if you still care.' Grandpa, were you going to send it?" I looked at the envelope. It had been a long time since I'd touched it. I picked it up. The paper was slightly yellowed, the folded corners soft with age. I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, written in my fountain pen with black ink and no corrections. I read it aloud. Not for Emily, but as if to remind myself. "Stephen, if you ever realize that I never hated you, but was just tired of having to prove I was worthy of your love, then know this, I am still here. But I am no longer waiting." I folded the letter again, carefully. Emily didn't speak, but I knew she was looking at me with the eyes of someone who had hoped for a warmer ending to the story. I shook my head gently. There was a time when I wanted to send this every single day. I'd take it out, then put it back, rewrite it, tear it up, write it again. But then, one day, I realized something: the person who needs to understand has to figure it out for themselves. And if they never do, a piece of paper can't change a thing. I opened the wooden cabinet and took out the small box of old memories. I placed the letter back inside. Not locked, but not stamped for mailing either. Emily said softly, "I understand." She came up behind me and put her arms around me, her hand resting gently on mine. Her voice was almost a whisper. "You're the reason I believe that a person doesn't have to sacrifice themselves into invisibility to be decent." I didn't reply. I just nodded, my eyes fixed on the garden where the sun was beginning to fall in shimmering patches through the trellis of flowers. In that moment, I knew I didn't need to be forgiven, nor did I need to be acknowledged. I just needed to hold the line of my own integrity. I boarded a cruise ship early one morning, departing from the port of Charleston, South Carolina. It was a 10-day voyage with 3 stops: Cozumel, Mexico, St. Thomas in the Virgin Islands, and a small, unnamed private island. I chose the smallest cabin. No balcony, no special services. I didn't need champagne. I just needed the sea. On the ship, I was assigned a dinner table with a retired German couple. They were in their 70s, spoke just enough English, and were polite and reserved. We talked about the weather, Italian coffee, and the last time any of us had seen a real starfish. No one asked, "What did you do for a living?" No one asked, "How many children do you have?" No one brought up the things that were once considered the essential parts of a man. And that was exactly what I needed: a journey where I didn't have to play a role. On the 4th night, I stood alone on the ship's deck. The wind was salty. The sea was a deep, endless black. The dim light from the white-painted railings cast a soft glow. In my jacket pocket, I had 2 things: a small wooden keychain engraved with the words, "My story has value," and a faded photograph of Stephen and Danica's simple second wedding. No guests, no fanfare. Just the 2 of them standing in front of a small restaurant, hand in hand, with strained smiles. It had been sent to me by mail with no note. I looked at the photo for a long time, not with regret, but because I wanted to remember the face of the man who had once called me Dad, but had chosen to erase me from the biggest day of his life. I held the photo in my hand and extended my arm over the railing. The wind tugged at it gently. I let go. The piece of paper fluttered in the air, spinning a few times before drifting down to the sea, as light as an old scar floating away in the darkness. I didn't feel pain. I just felt empty, in the best possible sense of the word. I went back to my cabin. On the table, the wooden keychain was still there. I ran my finger over the words, "My story has value." For the first time in 72 years, I felt that sentence needed no one else's confirmation. It didn't need a repentant son. It didn't need a corrected wedding. It didn't need praise for being magnanimous. I did not forgive. I did not resent. I just stepped out of the frame they had tried to erase me from and walked away. With my name whole, Edmund Blake. If you are reading this, I want you to remember one thing: no one owes you love, just because you have sacrificed. And if you have spent your entire life trying to be a good father, a good husband, a pillar of strength, ask yourself this: have you ever allowed yourself to live as just yourself? I am not a legend. I didn't get my revenge with fire and fury. I didn't use social media. I simply withdrew my presence and let them face the truth on their own. That is how I won back the greatest thing of all, my self-respect. And if anyone were to ask, "Do you have any regrets?" I would only reply, "No. I only regret that I didn't choose to stand up for myself sooner." People think old folks are easy to fool. The truth is we're just quieter when we strike. And you? If your child erased your name from the very wedding you paid for, what would you do? Let me know in the comments.